Captain Do-Yun checked his rifle for the third time in 10 minutes. The weapon felt light in his hands, almost toy-like compared to the massive plasma cannons the Korvac carried into battle. He stood on the observation deck of Forward Base 7, watching the twin suns of Helios Prime set behind the purple mountains. The sky turned deep orange, then blood red. "Sir, the perimeter sensors are picking up movement again," said Private Minho, barely 20 years old and still jumpy after 2 months on this frontier world. His hands shook slightly as he held his data pad. "Same as yesterday?" Do-Yun asked without turning around. The movement was probably just the local wildlife. Helios Prime had creatures that looked like 6-legged deer, harmless but curious about human technology. "No, sir, this is different. Multiple contacts moving in formation." Do-Yun felt ice form in his stomach. Formation movement meant intelligence. Intelligence meant soldiers. And the only soldiers in this sector besides humans were the ones that everyone in the galaxy feared: the Korvac. For 300 years, they had been the nightmare that haunted every species in the galactic community. 8 feet tall, covered in black scales harder than military armor, with claws that could tear through steel doors. They appeared without warning, destroyed everything in their path, and vanished like smoke. No one negotiated with the Korvac. No one made peace with them. They simply killed until nothing remained. "Sound the alert," Do-Hyun ordered. "Get everyone to battle stations." The base alarm began its harsh wailing. 12 human soldiers scrambled to their positions around the small outpost. They had been sent here to monitor shipping lanes and watch for pirate activity. Nobody expected them to face the galaxy's most dangerous enemy. Do-Hyun activated the long-range communicator. Static filled the air before he heard the voice of command, 40 light-years away. "Command, this is Forward Base 7. We have multiple contacts approaching our position. Request immediate reinforcement. Base 7. Reinforcements are not available. Nearest fleet elements are 6 days out. Hold your position and report." 6 days. Do-Hyun looked at his small team of soldiers. Good people, all of them, but they were observers, not warriors. Most had never seen real combat. If the Korvac were really coming, 6 days might as well be 6 years. "Understood, Command. Base 7 out." Sergeant Tae-hyun appeared at his side. The older man had fought in the border wars against the Nexus pirates, the closest thing to combat experience anyone on the base possessed. "Sir, should we evacuate the civilian settlement?" Do-Yun thought about the small town 5 kilometers away. 300 families who had come to Helios Prime to start new lives, to farm the rich soil and build homes far from the crowded core worlds. They trusted the human military to protect them. "Yes, send Corporal Jisoo with a squad. Get them to the transport ships as fast as possible." But even as he gave the order, Do-Hyun knew it might be too late. The Korvac moved like lightning when they attacked. Their ships were faster than anything humans had built, and their warriors fought with a savage efficiency that no military academy could teach. The perimeter alarms began screaming. Minho's face went white as he stared at his sensors. "Contact. Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace. They're big, sir, really big." Through the observation windows, Do-Hyun saw them. 3 Korvac war vessels, black as space itself, shaped like enormous predators with wings spread wide. They moved silently through the atmosphere, casting shadows across the landscape. "All stations, prepare for ground assault," Do-Hyun broadcast over the base communications. "Remember your training, watch your sectors, and may whatever gods you believe in have mercy on us all." The first explosions shook the base. Korvac weapons hit like hammers from the sky, turning concrete walls into dust and melting steel beams like candles. Do-Hyun felt the floor vibrate under his feet as blast after blast struck their defensive positions. "They're landing troops," someone shouted over the noise. Do-Hyun grabbed his rifle and ran toward the main entrance. Through the smoke and fire, he could see them coming. The Korvac warriors moved across the battlefield like demons from the old stories. Each one stood taller than any human, their black scales gleaming in the firelight. They carried weapons that seemed too large for any normal creature to lift, but the Korvac handled them like toys. The first wave hit the outer defenses. Human soldiers fired everything they had, plasma bolts and explosive rounds filling the air with deadly light. Some shots found their targets, sending Korvac warriors stumbling backward, but for every alien that fell, 3 more took its place. Private Minho crouched behind a barrier next to Do-hyun, his rifle chattering as he fired on full automatic. "Sir, they're not stopping. Nothing stops them." It was true. The Korvac absorbed damage that would kill any human and kept fighting. Do-hyun watched one warrior take a direct hit from a plasma cannon, saw the blast burn through its armor, and still the creature charged forward with its claws extended. "Fall back to the secondary line," Do-hyun ordered. His soldiers retreated in. Good order, just like they had practiced. But practice was different from reality. In practice, the enemy didn't move like liquid death across the battlefield. In practice, the enemy didn't shrug off wounds that would cripple a normal being. The secondary line lasted 10 minutes. The third line lasted 5. Soon, only the command bunker remained. Do-hyun and 4 surviving soldiers barricaded themselves inside the reinforced structure, knowing it would only delay the inevitable. The bunker's walls were 3 feet thick, designed to withstand orbital bombardment. But the Korvac had weapons designed to crack open spacecraft hulls. "Sir," said Minho, his young face streaked with dirt and blood from a cut on his forehead, "I want you to know, it's been an honor serving with you." Do-hyun nodded. Around him, his soldiers checked their weapons one last time. They were good people. They deserved better than to die in a hole in the ground, forgotten by history. The outer Dowker exploded inward. Through the smoke came the Korvac, moving with careful precision now that the real fighting was over. Their leader stood 9 feet tall, broader than the others, with scars covering his black scales like a map of ancient battles. His red eyes seemed to glow in the dim bunker light. Do-hyun raised his rifle, knowing it was useless, but unable to surrender without trying. The Korvac leader looked at him for a long moment, then made a gesture with one clawed hand. The other warriors lowered their weapons. "I am Rekthar," the leader said in perfect human standard language. His voice was deep and rough like rocks grinding together. "You fought well for your kind." Do-hyun kept his rifle aimed at the creature's center mass. "If you're going to kill us, get it over with." "Kill you?" Rekthar tilted his massive head. "No, human. I have questions. You will come with us." Before Do-hyun could react, something struck him from behind. Darkness closed over his vision like a wave, and his last thought was wonder at the idea that the Korvac took prisoners. Everyone knew they showed no mercy to their enemies. Everyone knew they left nothing alive in their wake. But here he was, unconscious, but breathing, about to discover that everything the galaxy believed about the Korvac might be wrong. Do-hyun woke up with his head pounding like a war drum. The first thing he noticed was the smell, something like burning metal mixed with alien sweat. The second thing was the chains around his wrists, thick and heavy but not tight enough to cut off his blood flow. He sat up slowly, fighting off waves of dizziness. Around him stretched a camp that looked nothing like what he expected from the galaxy's most feared warriors. The Korvac had built their shelters from salvaged materials and broken pieces of what looked like beautiful white stone. Everything was functional but not cruel. No torture devices, no piles of bones. Just a military camp that happened to be built by aliens. "You wake faster than most," said a familiar voice. Do-hyun turned to see Rekthar approaching. In daylight, the Korvac leader looked even more impressive. His black scales caught the sunlight like polished armor, and the scars that covered his body told stories of countless battles. But his red eyes held something Do-hyun had not expected to see. Intelligence mixed with what might have been curiosity. "Where are my men?" Do-hyun asked. "Dead," Rekthar replied without emotion. "They fought well. We honored them with warrior burials." The words hit Do-hyun like physical blows. Minho, barely out of training, Tai-hyun, who had talked about retiring to grow vegetables on his home world, Jisoo, who sent pictures of her children to everyone on the base. All gone. Why am I still alive? Rekthar settled onto a piece of broken stone that served as a chair. Even sitting, He towered over the human. Because I have questions about your species. Humans are new to this part of the galaxy. We know little about your military capabilities or your expansion plans. Do-hyun almost laughed. You want intelligence from me? You destroyed my entire base with 3 ships. What more do you need to know? Much. Rekthar gestured toward the camp around them. Look closely, human. Tell me what you see. Do-hyun looked. Really looked this time. The camp was larger than he had first realized, with hundreds of Korvac moving between the makeshift buildings. But many of them were not soldiers. Some were too young, their scales still showing the lighter colors of youth. Others were clearly injured, moving slowly or missing limbs. You have non-combatants here, Do-hyun said. We have survivors, Rekthar corrected. Warriors and their families, the old and the young, the wounded and the weak. We carry them all because that is what warriors do. A group of Korvac passed nearby, and Do-hyun watched as 2 large warriors carefully helped a third who was missing his left arm. They spoke in low voices, their tone gentle despite their fearsome appearance. I don't understand, Do-hyun said. Everyone knows the Korvac are savage killers. You destroy everything you touch. Rekthar's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger. Everyone knows? Tell me, human, who taught your people about us? The Galactic Council, military intelligence, survivor reports from attacked colonies. Survivors. Rekthar stood and began pacing, his massive form moving with surprising grace. Yes, we make sure there are always survivors, terrified survivors who spread tales of our savagery across the galaxy. Fear is a weapon, human. Better to be feared than to be seen as weak prey. A commotion near the camp's edge interrupted their conversation. Alarms began sounding, different from human alarms but clearly urgent. Korvac warriors grabbed weapons and rushed toward the perimeter. What is it? Do-hyun asked. Vrex, Rekthar snarled, and for the first time the Korvac leader showed real hatred. Insect filth that consume entire worlds. Through the camp's defensive barriers, Do-hyun could see them coming. The Vrex looked like a nightmare combination of spider and machine, their bodies gleaming with biomechanical parts that seemed to pulse with their own life. They moved in perfect coordination, like parts of a single mind. Why are they attacking you? Because we refuse to let them have this world, Rekthar said, checking his weapon. The ruins here contain knowledge from an ancient civilization. If the Vrex claim it, they will become even more dangerous. The battle began with a sound like tearing metal. Vrex weapons spat streams of acid that could melt through armor and bone alike. But the Korvac fought back with disciplined fury, their formations holding steady even under the terrible assault. Do-hyun watched in amazement as Rekthar personally directed the defense. The Korvac leader did not simply order his warriors forward, he moved among them, checking their positions, ensuring the wounded were protected, making sure no one was left alone against the enemy. Cover the medical shelters, Rekthar shouted in his own language. Several young Korvac, barely adults, rushed to defend the structures where injured warriors were healing. A Vrex breakthrough threatened to overrun the eastern defenses. Rekthar grabbed a plasma cannon from a fallen warrior and charged into the gap, his roar echoing across the battlefield. Do-hyun had never seen anything fight like the Korvac leader. He moved like controlled lightning, every action precise and deadly. But the Vrex had weapons designed to kill even creatures as tough as the Korvac. A stream of bioacid caught Rekthar across the chest, eating through his natural armor and burning into the flesh beneath. The Korvac leader stumbled but kept fighting, even as green fluid leaked from his wounds. The Vrex retreated when their assault failed, but they left behind devastation. Dozens of Korvac lay dead or dying. The medical shelters overflowed with wounded warriors, and Rekthar collapsed near the eastern barrier, his breathing shallow and labored. 2 Korvac medics rushed to their leader's side. Do-hyun could hear them talking in urgent voices, examining the acid burns that covered Rekthar's torso. The damage is too severe, one of them said in broken human standard. The biotoxins are spreading through his system. Then we end his suffering, said another warrior, drawing a ceremonial blade. It is the warrior's way. Wait, Do-hyun called out, surprising himself. Those burns. I've seen similar injuries before. During the Nexus War, pirates used acid weapons. There are neutralizing agents that can stop the spread. The Korvac medics looked at him with suspicion. You would help him? After what we did? To your base? Do-hyun looked down at Rekthar, who was conscious but clearly dying. The alien who had destroyed his command and killed his friends. The leader of the species that terrorized the galaxy, but also the commander who protected his wounded. The warrior who fought to defend ancient knowledge from creatures that would use it for evil. The being who carried survivors because that was what warriors did. Tell me what medical supplies you have, Do-hyun said quietly. Maybe we can save him. As the Korvac medics began listing their resources, Do-hyun realized that everything he thought he knew about these creatures was wrong. They were not mindless killers. They were soldiers fighting for something they believed in, carrying their wounded and protecting their families, just like humans did, just like any decent species would do. The question now was whether human knowledge could save the life of his captor, and whether saving Rekthar would change anything in a galaxy built on fear and misunderstanding. The neutralizing agent worked. Do-hyun mixed chemicals from the Korvac medical supplies with knowledge he had learned during his military training. The green poison stopped spreading through Rekthar's body, and slowly, very slowly, the massive warrior began to heal. For 3 days, Do-hyun sat beside the Korvac leader's medical bed. The human captain found himself checking Rekthar's vital signs and adjusting his treatment like a field medic. It felt strange to care for someone who had killed his friends, but Do-hyun could not bring himself to let anyone die when he had the power to help. On the 4th day, Rekthar opened his red eyes and looked directly at his human prisoner. Why? The Korvac asked, his voice weak but clear. Why what? Why did you save me? I destroyed your base. I killed your soldiers. Do-hyun had asked himself the same question many times. Because you were dying and I could help. That's reason enough. Rekthar studied the human's face for a long moment. Your species is strange. So I've been told. As Rekthar recovered, the two began to talk. At first, their conversations were short and careful. Do-hyun asked about Korvac medicine. Rekthar asked about human military structure. Neither fully trusted the other, but both were curious. Gradually, their talks grew longer and more personal. Rekthar told stories of battles across distant star systems. Do-hyun shared memories of Earth and the human colonies spreading across space. They were still enemies, but they were also two soldiers who understood each other's dedication to duty. Tell me about your homeworld, Do-hyun said one evening as they sat outside the medical shelter. The twin suns were setting again, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Rekthar's expression darkened. We have no homeworld. Everyone has a homeworld, not the Korvac. Rekthar's claws dug into the stone he sat on. Our world was called Korvac, Prime. Beautiful beyond description, with crystal cities that reached into the clouds and gardens that bloomed for 1,000 years. We were artists and philosophers then, not warriors. Do-hyun waited for him to continue. The Devourers came when I was young, Rekthar said quietly. Creatures from beyond the edge of the galaxy. They consume everything, planets, stars, entire civilizations. They ate our world like fruit, leaving nothing behind but empty space. How many of you escaped? Perhaps 1 million, from a population of billions. We loaded our ships with everything we could carry and fled into space. That was 800 years ago. Do-hyun felt a chill run down his spine. 800 years? But you look like you're in your prime. Korvac live much longer than humans. I have seen 40 generations of your species rise and fall while we searched for a new home. Rekthar's voice carried the weight of centuries. But everywhere we try to settle, the Devourers eventually find us. So we learn to move constantly, to take what we need and leave before they arrive. The raids, the attacks on colonies, necessary evils. We need resources, supplies, fuel for our ships. Better to be seen as savage raiders than desperate refugees. Fear keeps other species away from us, which keeps them safe from what follows us. Do-hyun began to understand. You're not conquerors. You're running. We are survivors, Rekthar corrected. We learned to fight because the universe gave us no choice. We became what others expected us to be because it served our needs. But you could ask for help. The Galactic Council, other species. Rekthar laughed, a sound like rocks falling. Help? We tried that, human. 300 years ago, we approached the Altarian Republic with peaceful intentions. We explained our situation and asked only for temporary shelter, while we searched for an uninhabited world to call home. What happened? They betrayed us to the Devourers, sent our location in exchange for promises that their own worlds would be spared. We lost 60,000 people in that attack, including most of our remaining children. The weight of that betrayal hung in the air between them. Dohyun tried to imagine his own species scattered across the galaxy, hunted by creatures that devoured worlds, betrayed by those they had trusted. Since then, we trust no one but ourselves, Rekthar continued. We take what we need and move on. We fight when we must and show mercy only to our own kind. It is the only way to survive. What about the Vreks? Why fight them here? Rekthar gestured toward the ruins that dotted the landscape around them. This world once held a great civilization. In their ruins are star maps showing safe passages through unexplored regions of space. With those maps, we might find worlds beyond the reach of the Devourers. And the Vreks want the same maps. The Vreks want to expand their hive mind across the galaxy. Those maps would give them access to thousands of undefended worlds. We cannot allow that. Dohyun looked out over the Korvac camp. Children played between the shelters while their parents repaired weapons and tended to the wounded. Old warriors told stories to young ones who listened with wide eyes. It looked almost peaceful, if you ignored the fact that everyone was armed and ready for battle. You carry your entire civilization with you, Dohyun realized. What remains of it? Rekthar agreed. Every ship holds families, history, culture. When a Korvac dies, we all become a little less than we were. A new alarm sounded from the camp's perimeter. Both warriors turned toward the sound, recognizing the pattern. Long-range sensors had detected something big approaching the system. A young Korvac scout rushed toward them, her scales still showing the bright colors of youth. War Leader Rekthar. The sensors show a massive fleet dropping out of hyperspace. Vrex design, but much larger than anything we have seen before. Rekthar struggled to his feet, still weak from his injuries. How many ships? Over 200, sir. They are moving to surround the planet. Dohyun felt his stomach drop. 200 Vrex ships meant they were not planning another ground assault. They intended to cleanse the entire world from orbit, killing everything on the surface to deny the Korvac access to the ancient maps. Can your people evacuate? Dohyun asked. Not quickly enough. Half our ships are damaged from months of fighting. Our wounded cannot be moved safely. Rekthar looked toward the camp where his people were already preparing for another siege. We will make our stand here. Against 200 ships? That's suicide. Perhaps. But if we can hold long enough for some of our people to escape with the star maps, then our deaths will have meaning. Rekthar placed a massive hand on Dohyun's shoulder. You do not have to stay, human. Your people are not part of this fight. Dohyun looked at the Korvac leader. This being he had thought was a monster just days before. A creature who had carried the survivors of his species across the galaxy for 8 centuries, fighting impossible odds to keep them alive. Actually, Dohyun said quietly, I think maybe we are. The first orbital strike hit the northern ridge at dawn. The explosion was so bright that Dohyun had to shield his eyes, and the sound that followed made his bones ache. Where rocky hills had stood moments before, now only a smoking crater remained. They are starting far from the camp, said Hiram, a young Korvac medic who barely looked old enough to be a warrior. She was helping load wounded soldiers onto the few ships that could still fly, testing their weapons before the real attack begins. Dohyun watched the evacuation process with growing amazement. Every healthy Korvac worked to save the injured, carrying warriors who could not walk and carefully loading medical equipment onto the transports. No one complained. No one abandoned their duties to save themselves. How many ships do you have that can make the jump to hyperspace? He asked Rekthar. 4 that are fully operational. 3 more that might survive the journey, if we are lucky. The Korvac leader stood near the command post, directing the evacuation with calm efficiency, despite the destruction raining from the sky. Not enough for everyone. Then who goes? The children first. Then the wounded who cannot fight. Then the keepers of our history and culture. Rekthar's scarred face showed no emotion, but Do-yun could see the pain in his red eyes. The warriors will hold the camp until the evacuation is complete. And then we die as warriors should, fighting to protect what matters most. Another orbital blast struck closer to the camp. The ground shook and dust filled the air. Through the chaos, Do-yun saw something that made his throat tight. A group of Korvac children, no older than human teenagers, were helping elderly warriors reach the transport ships. The young ones moved carefully, making sure none of the old soldiers felt ashamed of needing help. "Your people are remarkable," Do-yun said quietly. "They are all we have," Rekthar replied. "Every life matters. Every death diminishes us all." A communication alert sounded from the command post. The operator, an older Korvac with gray streaks in his black scales, called out in their language. Rekthar answered, then turned to Do-hyun with something like surprise on his face. "What is it?" Do-hyun asked. "Long-range sensors detect human ships approaching the system, a full battle fleet." Do-hyun felt hope flare in his chest. "Reinforcements. They must have received my base's final transmission." "No, human. These ships are moving to attack positions around the planet. It appears your people have decided to ally with the Vreks." The words hit Do-hyun like a physical blow. He stared at the tactical display, watching as human ships took positions alongside the Vreks fleet, his own species, working with the insect creatures that wanted to consume entire worlds. "They don't understand," he said desperately. "They think you're the enemy. If I could contact them, explain what's really happening." "It would not matter," Rekthar said with sad certainty. "Fear is easier than understanding. Hatred is simpler than compassion. Your leaders see only what they expect to see." The combined human-Vreks bombardment began in earnest. Massive explosions walked across the landscape like the footsteps of angry gods. The Korvac camp's defensive shields flared and sparked under the assault, their energy reserves dropping rapidly. "Shields failing," called the communications operator. "We have maybe 20 minutes before they collapse completely." Rekthar turned to address his warriors. His voice carried across the camp without electronic amplification, cutting through the noise of the bombardment. "Brothers and sisters," he said in human standard so that Do-hyun could understand. "Today we face the end, but we do not face it as victims. We face it as Korvac, as the last guardians of our people's memory. Fight well, die with honor, and know that your sacrifice gives our children a chance to see tomorrow." The evacuation ships began launching, rising through the atmosphere under heavy fire. Do-hyun watched them go and felt something break inside his chest. Those ships carried the last remnants of an ancient civilization, refugees who had wandered the galaxy for 800 years looking for a home they would never find. One of the transport ships took a direct hit from a human plasma cannon. The explosion lit up the sky, and pieces of burning metal rained down like tears. Everyone in that ship, children, elderly, wounded warriors, gone in an instant because humans and Vreks had decided the Korvac were too dangerous to live. "We saved 3 ships," Hiram said, tears streaming down her scaled face. 3 out of 7, maybe 300 people out of nearly 1,000. The defensive shields finally collapsed. Orbital fire began hitting the camp directly, turning shelters into rubble and vaporizing everything in its path. The surviving Korvac warriors took positions among the ruins, preparing for the ground assault that would surely follow. "You should go," Rekthar said to Do-hyun. "When the enemy troops land, they will see you as a prisoner who needs rescue. You can survive this." Do-hyun looked around the doomed camp, at Hiram, who was still trying to treat wounded soldiers even as explosions shook the ground beneath her feet. At the old warriors who checked their weapons with steady hands despite knowing they would not live to see another sunset. At the young scouts who volunteered for the most dangerous positions because they were fastest and had the best chance of taking enemies with them when they died. These were not monsters. These were people fighting to protect everything they loved, just like humans had done when the first colonies were attacked by pirates, just like any decent species would do when faced with extinction. "I have a better idea," Do-hyun said. He walked to the communications console and began adjusting the settings. "Can this reach the human fleet?" "Yes, but then maybe it's time someone told them the truth." Rekthar placed a massive hand on Do-hyun's shoulder. "They will not listen. You are one voice against the fears of an entire galaxy. Maybe, but I have to try." Do-hyun activated the long-range transmitter and began broadcasting on all human military frequencies. "Human fleet, this is Captain Do-hyun of Forward Base 7. I am alive and unharmed. The Korvac are not what you think they are. They are refugees, not conquerors. Survivors, not monsters. If you continue this attack, you will be committing genocide against innocent people." Static answered him. Then a cold voice from the human command ship. "Captain Do-hyun, you are obviously under duress and speaking under alien influence. Maintain your position. We will extract you after the enemy threat is neutralized." The bombardment intensified. It was clear that nothing Do-hyun said would stop what was coming. The combined human-Vrex fleet would sterilize the planet's surface, killing every Korvac they could find. "I am sorry," Do-hyun said to Rekthar. "I failed." "No, human. You tried. That is more than anyone else has ever done for us." The first Vrex ground forces began landing. Sleek bioships disgorged swarms of insect warriors who moved across the battlefield, like a living carpet of death. Behind them came human marines advancing with military precision toward the Korvac positions. Rekthar hefted his weapon and looked toward his remaining warriors. "For the memory of Korvac Prime. For the future of our children. Fight well, my friends." As the final battle began, Do-hyun made a choice that surprised even himself. Instead of seeking safety with the human forces, he picked up a fallen Korvac rifle and took position beside the aliens who had become his unlikely companions. If this was genocide, then he would not be part of it. If these were his final moments, then he would spend them protecting the innocent, regardless of what species they belonged to. The human in him demanded survival. The warrior in him demanded honor. Today, the warrior would win. The final battle began with the sound of 1,000 deaths. Vrex bioweapons shrieked through the air while human plasma cannons answered with their own deadly song. The Korvac defenders fought with the desperation of people who had nothing left to lose, but they were outnumbered 10-1. Do-hyun crouched behind a piece of broken wall, the stolen Korvac rifle heavy in his hands. The weapon was designed for someone twice his size, but he had learned to use it during the long nights of preparation. Beside him, Hyarim loaded wounded warriors into a makeshift medical shelter built from the ruins of their camp. "The western line is falling," she called over the noise of battle. Her voice was calm despite the chaos around them. "We need to move the wounded again." Through the smoke and fire, Do-hyun could see the Vrex advancing like a living wave of death. Their biomechanical bodies gleamed wetly in the explosion's light, and their weapons spat streams of acid that could dissolve armor and flesh alike. Behind them came human soldiers, their familiar uniforms a painful reminder of everything Do-hyun had once believed about right and wrong. "There's nowhere left to move them," said Kaval, Rekthar's young nephew. The Korvac warrior had been badly wounded in the morning's fighting, but he refused to leave his position. Green blood leaked from cracks in his scales where shrapnel had found its mark. Rekthar appeared through the smoke, moving from position to position to encourage his remaining warriors. The great leader's armor was cracked and burned, and his left arm hung useless at his side, but his red eyes still burned with fierce determination. "Uncle," Kaval called out. "The humans are breaking through on the eastern flank." "Then we make our last stand here," Rekthar replied. He knelt beside his nephew and placed his good hand on the young warrior's shoulder. "You have fought with honor, Kaval. Your ancestors would be proud." I wanted to see the new world, Kaval whispered. The one we would find beyond the Devourer's reach. Perhaps you will, in whatever comes after this life. A massive explosion shook the ground. When the dust cleared, Do-Yun could see that their defensive perimeter had been cut in half. Vrex bioforms swarmed through the breach, followed by human marines with their weapons ready. The medical shelter took a direct hit. Hierim screamed as burning debris pinned her legs, and 3 wounded Korvac warriors who could not move were crushed instantly. Do-Hyun ran toward her, pulling chunks of concrete away from her trapped body. "Leave me," she gasped. "Save yourself." "Not happening," Do-Hyun replied, remembering the words Rekthar had spoken about carrying the wounded. Warriors did not abandon those who could not protect themselves. He lifted Hierim in his arms, surprised by how light she was despite her warrior's build. Around them, the last of the Korvac defense was crumbling. Old warriors fell with weapons in their hands. Young scouts died trying to protect elders who could no longer fight. The ground was soaked with blood from a dozen different species, all mixing together in the mud. Kaval tried to stand, then collapsed as his wounds reopened. His breathing was shallow and rapid, and his scales had lost their healthy shine. The young Korvac was dying, and everyone knew it. "Uncle," he called out, weakly. Rekthar fought his way through the chaos to reach his nephew's side. The great war leader knelt in the mud and cradled Kaval's head in his lap, just as Do-Hyun had seen human parents comfort their dying children. "I'm here," Rekthar said softly. "I'm here." But Rekthar was badly wounded himself. A Vrex bioweapon had torn through his chest armor, and his life was leaking away with every heartbeat. He would not survive much longer, and Kavel was too injured to move. A group of Vrex warriors spotted the gathering and began advancing toward them, their acid weapons charging with deadly purpose. Human marines flanked them on both sides, cutting off any chance of escape. Do-Hyun looked at the dying Korvac in his arms, then at Rekthar and Kaval surrounded by enemies. Every instinct told him to run, to find safety with his own species, to survive. Instead, he made a choice that defied everything the galaxy expected of humans. He set Hierim down gently behind the largest piece of cover he could find, then walked back to where Rekthar knelt with his dying nephew. The great war leader looked up at him with eyes that held no hope, only the quiet acceptance of a warrior who had fought his last battle. "Go, human," Rekthar said. "Your people are coming. You can live." Do-Hyun knelt beside Kaval and lifted the young Korvac onto his shoulders. The alien warrior was much larger than the human, but Do-Hyun had carried wounded comrades before. He knew how to distribute the weight, how to move without causing more damage to broken bones and torn flesh. "What are you doing?" Rekthar asked. "What warriors do," Do-Hyun replied. "We carry our wounded." He began walking across the battlefield step by careful step. Kaval was unconscious now, his body limp with approaching death, but he was still breathing, still alive, still worth saving. The journey became a nightmare of smoke and fire. Vrex bioforms skittered past them, focused on other targets. Human soldiers shouted at each other in languages Do-Hyun recognized from a dozen different colonies. Explosions threw dirt and debris into the air, making each breath a struggle. Do-Hyun's legs shook with exhaustion. His back screamed in agony from Kaval's weight. His lungs burned from the poisonous smoke that filled the air. But he kept walking, one step at a time, toward the distant extraction point where evacuation ships might still be landing. A Vrex patrol spotted them and opened fire. Do-Hyun threw himself sideways, using his own body to shield Kaval from the acid streams. The bioweapon burned through his uniform and into his shoulder, but he did not drop his burden. "Human," a voice called out, in standard language. "What are you doing with that alien?" Do-Hyun turned to see a squad of human marines approaching, their weapons trained on him and Kaval. The squad leader's face was hidden behind a combat helmet, but his voice held suspicion and anger. "I'm carrying a wounded warrior to safety," Do-Hyun replied simply. "That's the enemy." "No, that's a refugee, a survivor, someone who needs help. You're suffering from alien mind control. Put the creature down and step away." Do-hyun adjusted Kaval's weight on his shoulders and kept walking. I don't think so. The Marines followed him, their weapons still ready but not firing. Word of the strange sight began to spread across the battlefield communications networks, a human soldier carrying his supposed enemy to safety, refusing orders to abandon his burden. Other soldiers stopped fighting to watch. Freck's bioforms paused in their advance, confused by behavior that did not match their understanding of warfare. Even the orbital bombardment seemed to quiet as ship commanders tried to understand what they were seeing. Do-hyun reached the extraction zone just as his strength finally failed. He collapsed to his knees, but managed to lower Kaval gently to the ground before falling forward into the mud. The young Korvac was still breathing, still alive. Rekthar appeared from the smoke, supported by 2 human medics who had recognized him as a wounded combatant rather than an active threat. The great war leader was dying, but he had lived long, enough to see his nephew reach safety. Why? Rekthar asked, kneeling beside Do-hyun. Why did you do this? Do-hyun looked up at the alien who had once been his enemy. Around them, human and Korvac soldiers watched in silence, weapons lowered, the battle forgotten for this one moment. Because that's what we do, Do-hyun said quietly. We show mercy. We help the wounded. We carry those who cannot carry themselves. He took a painful breath. Even if they're supposed to be our enemies. The story spread across the galaxy in the days that followed. The human who carried a Korvac warrior across a battlefield where such compassion should have been impossible. The enemy who showed mercy when everyone expected only death. The war did not end immediately. Fear and hatred were too deeply rooted for that. But something had changed. A crack had appeared in the wall of misunderstanding that separated the species. Some humans began to ask questions about the Korvac refugees they had been told were monsters. Some Korvac began to wonder if all humans were as compassionate as the one who had saved Kaval's life. And in the medical facilities where both species healed from their wounds, doctors discovered that Korvac and human blood could be mixed safely, that their wounded could help each other survive. They said the beast had no mercy, but a human had shown them what mercy truly meant, carrying that understanding across a battlefield where hope should have died. Sometimes, one act of compassion was enough to change everything.